In this video, I want to walk you through what I wish I knew when I was a new spinner. As an enthusiastic new spinner, I wanted to know how can I get better, and I wanted to do it fast. But all of the experienced spinners that I knew told me that I just needed to practice. Well, I'm here to tell you that you do need to practice, but there are things that you can find out now that will help you focus that practice so that you can accelerate the building of your skills. No matter what type of yarn you want to spin or what tools you use, these 5 lesser known truths about spinning will transform your spinning practice. So let's get started. One thing you notice when you first start spinning is your singles yarn that you're spinning is plying back on itself. It's making these little pigtails. And a lot of people think that this means that you're over twisting your yarn, but that's not the case. This is normal. All singles yarn will twist like this and it's fine. In fact, you can use this to your advantage by making a plyback sample. One use of a plyback sample while you're spinning is that if you're doing it particularly a long spin, you can make sure that the twist and the thickness of your yarn stays consistent throughout the entire skein. So you can continue to ply back the single and compare it against that original plyback sample to see, am I still hitting the same thickness? Am I still getting the same amount of twist in my yarn? You may be thinking, what about singles yarn like this one? Well, it turns out that this commercial singles yarn also plies back on itself. Now, it's not plying back as hard as my fresh singles. The reason for that is twofold. The first reason is that this yarn has been finished in a particular way to help balance them out and take out some of that excess energy. The other reason is that these singles have been sitting around, and that brings us to our next fact, which is that rested singles often play dead. When you leave your singles wound onto a bobbin or onto a spindle for a long period of time, and maybe even a short period of time, like a day, the twist energy that's in them starts to dissipate. It doesn't necessarily go away, but it starts to behave as though it has a lot less twist than it actually does. And the longer you let it sit, the more that energy dissipates. I have here a bobbin that I'm using to store some old singles that I spun a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago. And I know these have been sitting for a long time. As I unwind this and attempt to ply it back on itself, you see that they do twist, but not nearly as much as a fresh single. And this is about as much twist in it as the single that I showed you a second ago did. When you're plying fresh singles, you have to put a lot of tension on those singles to keep those pigtails from getting trapped in between the plies. So when you have rested singles and those pigtails aren't appearing as readily, it's a little bit easier to keep the tension on and keep those pigtails out of your finished yarn. The other thing that's kind of useful is if you're doing kind of a fancier plying technique like chain plying, the singles get a lot less tangled when you have them rested ahead of time. In fact, a lot of people prefer to always rest their bobbins and rest their singles before plying. You don't really have to do this, but it can make them easier to handle. The reason I wanted to talk about this is that when I was a new spinner, I thought that when I was plying my yarn, my goal was for the finished yarn, when it was hanging out of my orifice or off of my spindle, that it should be neutral like this. And that is the case when the twist is all active in your singles. But chances are, as a new spinner, and even as an experienced spinner, your singles are gonna sit on the bobbin for some amount of time. So they will appear to have less twist in them than they actually do. So in order to get enough ply twist, you actually have to feel like you're over plying it. In fact, I would say that a more appropriate level of twist that you should look for, depending on how long your singles have been sitting, is just a little bit of a curl like this, like a little bit, but there should be an open loop at the bottom. So for rested singles, you shouldn't look for your ply back to be totally neutral. You should look for it to have just a little bit of twist. I recommend you use the plyback sample from when you were first spinning your singles to be a reference while you're plying. That's the easiest way to make sure you get plenty of twist. If you didn't make a plyback sample, or if you didn't save your plyback sample, all you have to do is take your singles yarn and fold it back on itself, tie a knot in one end, get it wet with some warm water. As the water wets the yarn, you'll see the twist energy immediately start to return. Once this sample is dry, you can use it as a reference for your plying. If you've already plied some skeins, you may find yourself pulling them out and finding that they are under-plied or over-plied. Well, what do? And that's where the next fact comes in, which is that if at first you don't succeed, you can always ply again. To add ply twist on your spinning wheel, you're going to want to go pretty slowly. What you'll see me doing here is spinning in the ply direction, which in this case is the S direction, and checking and seeing, do I still have an underply? And I do right now. So I'm adding a little bit more, checking, adding a little bit more, checking, and it seems a little bit underplied to me. And so I added a little bit more twist. And oops, looks like I went a little bit too far. And you can tell that this is Z twist because the yarn kind of twists around itself in a Z. You can kind of see that. So what I'm doing next is letting out some more of the yarn from my hand that's underplied to kind of make up for the over-plied twist. That takes it back to being underplied again, and I can add more twist. And now I'm getting a little closer to a neutral yarn. One of the especially nice things about correcting an over or underplied yarn on a spindle is it's a lot easier to just go slow step by step. And what you'll see me doing both on the wheel and on the spindle is taking the tension off of the yarn and letting it twist on itself a little bit to see what type of twist it has. If it has S twist, it wants more S twist. If it has Z twist, it wants more Z twist. And the ply back that it's doing on itself, it's giving itself the energy that it wants. So if you can identify that there's an S twist in that yarn, then it wants S twist. If you can identify a Z twist in the yarn, it wants Z twist. There are several mnemonic devices to help you know which way to do it. I can tell you that this yarn wants more Z twist. So this is over-plied at this point. And the way I know that, and I can see it from way back here, is when it had one loop left, the yarn in my right hand crossed in front, and that tells me it wants Z twist. If the strand in your right hand crosses in front, that means the yarn wants Z twist. If the yarn or the strand that's in your left hand crosses in front, then that means the yarn wants S twist. And of course, the other advantage to using a spindle instead of a spinning wheel here is you get to control exactly when you wind on, and you're not necessarily, whenever you wind on a spinning wheel, you're adding more twist, but on a spindle you can wind on without adding any twist at all. I actually have a whole duffel bag full of underplied yarn that I inherited with my spinning wheel, and I do plan later this year to put a little bit extra ply twist in it. If you're not subscribed and you'd like to see that content, I do recommend that you subscribe now so you won't miss it. Did you know that not only do you not have to accept your first ply attempt, but you also don't have to accept your first draft? Sometimes as you're spinning along, you get a thick spot that you don't want, and it is possible to remove that. So I spun this thick spot on purpose, but you can just take both hands and untwist from both sides on either side of the thick spot, and then pull back and thin that section out. The twist will actually just go back into it anyway because the twist always goes to the thinner sections of yarn. But here you'll see me adding a little extra twist to make it match the rest of the yarn. The way you fix a slub on a spindle is pretty much the same. So here I am kind of creating a thick spot. All right, so there's a thick spot, and Now I'm going to tuck the spindle under my arm so that it's out of the way. And then the same thing, I'm going to put one hand on either side of the slub and then I'll pull to redraft it. And as you see, the extra twist from the rest of the single is going in there. And now I'm going to do a plyback test to show you that you actually do need to add a little bit more twist because the slub ate the twist. Here I am comparing it to my plyback sample, and you can see it's a little bit little bit thicker now all along the length because there's not enough twist. So I'll add a little bit more twist to this, and then it should match my plyback sample after that. And there we go. I know a lot of the facts I'm sharing with you are about fixing things and making your yarn more perfect. But at the end of the day, even after doing all of these things, handspun yarn is never perfect, least of all your first skein. Your first handspun is worthy. It is worthy of using. It is worthy of loving. This is my very first handspun yarn that I spun on this spindle 2.5 years ago. I see this yarn as beautiful, even though there are underspun sections, there are overspun sections, there's pigtails showing through. There are sections where one ply has a lot more twist than the other, and they kind of spiral around each other. But oh, there's a spiral. With all of these flaws, this yarn is still worthy. One of my hibernating whips is actually this scarf that I'm making out of the beginner handspun that was in that duffel bag. And this hasn't even been replied to add in some more ply twist. As I mentioned, everything in that bag is under-plied. It makes it a little bit more challenging to work with, but I haven't even fixed this yarn, and look how beautiful this is turning out. This is just a garter stitch scarf, but the yarn itself is doing a lot of work here, creating a lot of really cool texture. To me, it almost looks like moss growing on the side of a building or something. This was one of my favorite skeins in that bag, mostly because of the color. But your handspun is just as beautiful as this. And once you start knitting with your handspun, a lot of the faults just disappear into the knitting, honestly. Even a beginner yarn, once it's been knit up, doesn't show a lot of faults. And the faults that do show add character to the piece. In addition, you learn a lot about your handspun by knitting with it. You learn the amount of twist that you like in your handspun, the drafting styles you like. If you haven't done so yet, go do your craft of choice with the handspun yarn that you've created, even your beginning handspun. Remember, you don't have to use the whole skein. You can just use a little bit of it. Maybe use a little bit of it as an accent to a larger piece that uses mostly commercial yarn. If you choose to make an entire project just out of your very textured handspun, you choose stitch patterns that are simple, such as garter stitch or stockinette stitch. Those stitch patterns will allow the texture of your yarn to shine through. I'm thinking about doing a future episode all about knitting patterns to make with your first skein of handspun. If that's something you're interested in, let me know in the comments below. Fresh singles will always pigtail. Rested singles will play dead. You can always reply your plied yarns or redraft your singles. And no matter what yarns you spin, they're worthy of being made into something beautiful. So now you know what you need to practice and get better at hand spinning even faster. If you're still here, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to catch you in the next one. Please be sure to leave a comment below and let me know what you'd like to see me cover next. Bye!